Our animation is running a bit slow. It's almost as if the ball is on the moon or something. We could speed up the animation by scaling the curves in the graph editor. However, there's an easier way. We can scale all of the keys for the entire world in time using a window called the dope sheet. Let's open that up. Select the ball or any object and go into Window, Animation Editors, Dope Sheet. And we'll see in here keyframes for the selected object. If we select an object that has no keyframes, we will see nothing. Okay, so we'll select that ball. And in the dope sheet, we've got a hierarchy. We can open this up. If I open up ball here with a little square, we can see its child, squash handle. And if we open up that, we will see there's a squash handle shape. Also, there are little round plus signs here. I can open that up, and that's how we get at individual keyframes, individual channels. Let's zoom in here using Alt and right mouse and change the position of the dope sheet using Alt and middle mouse. And each one of these dots represents either a keyframe or a category of keyframes. This is a little bit strange. Going to take a little bit getting used to here. So if I open up Translate, open this up further, you'll see Translate X and Translate Y. These ones that are in italics are actual real channels. And anything that's not in italics is just a category of information and is not actually a channel. So Translate X actually has keyframes on it. Translate Y actually has keyframes, as does Rotate Z. So these are real keys here. But everything else that you see in here is not a real keyframe. You can also tell by the color coding of the channels themselves. The ones that are in gray here on my system are actual real channels, and the ones that are in color here are categories of channels. Notice also that if you select a real keyframe, like if I select Rotate Z, select a keyframe there, it will light up, and then Rotate lights up because something inside Rotate has been selected. And Ball lights up because something inside Ball has been selected. And Dope Sheet Summary lights up, and that's the summary of all the keyframes on the selected object and its hierarchy. So there's no color coding to this selection, unfortunately. Rotate Z is actually selected. The rest of this stuff is not actually selected because they're not actually keyframes at all. This is going to take a little bit of getting used to, but once you are used to it, it's pretty easy to work with. Our goal here is to scale all of the keyframes in time for the entire world. And in fact, we could do that with the Dope Sheet Summary, because in fact, all the keyframes are in one hierarchy in this case. However, in a more complex scene, the Dope Sheet Summary won't be of much use to you, and it only works for selected hierarchies. We're going to look at a way of scaling time and moving keyframes for all of the objects in the world, whether they're selected or not. So for example, if I click off of the ball and now nothing's selected, now I can open up a section of the dope sheet that will show me all of the keyframes for the whole world. That's under View, Scene Summary. Turn that on. And now these are all of the keyframes for the entire scene. And I can grab the Scale tool here and then drag a selection rectangle around those. And they're highlighted. And I additionally see this scale box around everything. And to scale this in time, I want to use the middle mouse button. If I want to have the animation end more quickly on an earlier time, then I'll middle mouse click and drag from the right-hand side of that selection box. And I'll just drag that over until I get to about frame 30 or so. You can see here frame 30. And just release the mouse. All right, I'll minimize the dope sheet and then rewind and play that back. And you can see it's playing back more quickly. I've scaled all the keyframes, including all of the squash and stretch. However, you may see some issues here. Let's look at this in the front view. I'll tap the space bar, and on frame 15, which is the middle of my animation, you'll notice that there's no squash effect. Interesting. When you scale time in the dope sheet, Maya does its level best to preserve the proportion of keyframes relative to one another, but it does not attempt to snap those keyframes to whole numbers. And what has happened here is that the squash keyframe that used to be on frame 24 is now somewhere between frame 15 and frame 16. Let's look at that. I'll go back to the dope sheet, zoom in with Alt-right, and position with Alt-left, and select this keyframe here. Just use the select tool. And look at the statistics here. That keyframe is now on frame 15.192. Maya is very advanced. It will allow you to place keyframes between whole number frames. And this is great because it'll allow you to do something like, for example, animate at 30 frames per second, but then render at 24 frames per second. However, in this situation, when I scaled those keyframes, I had a little bit of an unexpected result here. And what I'd like to do to fix this is to cause all these keyframes to snap to whole numbers. To do that, I'll zoom back out again, select all the keyframes, and then go into the dope sheet menu and choose Edit, Snap. And now all the keyframes will snap to whole numbers. If I select one, that's on frame 15, frame 18, and so on. And now if I park on frame 15 here at the point of impact, it's actually squashing correctly. Okay, now you may need to actually edit the result of that scale. So let's take a look at that. I'll select the squash handle and go into the input nodes here, and once that node is selected, we'll be able to see the keyframes here in the timeline. And we can actually edit either in the dope sheet or the timeline. Go back to the dope sheet, for example, and grab the move tool, and I could select keyframes here and move them. Just click on it to select it, and then use the middle mouse button to drag to move. That's one way. Or I could do the same thing from the timeline here, but if I did that, I would only be adjusting it for the selected node. Here I'm doing it for all the keyframes in the whole world. All right, I'm done with the dope sheet. I'll just finish this up by moving these keyframes here in the timeline. To do that, you have to select the key first. Hold down the Shift key and click to the immediate right of the keyframe. And that'll actually select that key. And then you can left mouse click and drag to move. You don't have to be in any particular tool to do it. You could have the select tool active. Hold down Shift and click to the right of that keyframe, and then it'll highlight in really big bright red, and then you can move the keyframe. You could also do blocks of keyframes. You could hold down Shift and drag across, select multiple keyframes. Just remember that you have to go past the last keyframe in order to select it. If I did this, if I held down Shift and then dragged, I'm actually not selecting that last keyframe. I have to go past it. Okay, so I'll do that again. I'll click off to unselect those. Hold down Shift and drag past the last keyframe, and then I could shift all of them around using these handles here. Okay, so that's how we can edit keyframes in the timeline as well. Great, so our animation is finished. Let's take a look. Tap the space bar. And now we just need to add some lighting and we'll be ready to render the shot. And we'll go ahead and increment and save once again.